Good morning. This is Julie Cherry with the Louisiana AFL-CIO, and you are listening to Baton Rouge Labor Radio on WTQT 106.1 FM, and we are sponsored by the Louisiana AFL-CIO and the Baton Rouge Building and Construction Trades. You've been listening to Charles Showalter with the Union Edge, talking a little bit about the fight to raise minimum wages that has been going on all over the country. He has a show called the Union Edge. They have a website presence, and so does Workers Independent News that can tell you a little something about things that are going on in other parts of the country. Here in Baton Rouge, the first thing I want to remind you of this morning is that early voting starts today for the May 2nd election. In our area, that election has two propositions on the ballot that support the St. George Fire Protection District. The first one is for a new 10-year, 2 mil property tax, and the reason for that is that they want to build a new station, make water flow improvements, and hire more firefighters that could improve the fire rating from Class 2 to Class 1. This is your opportunity to decide which taxes you want to pay and what for. I will remind folks that when you improve your fire protection rating, you do generally lower the cost of your homeowner's insurance, as well as certifying that you have better protection. The second one is for a 10-year 1.25 mil property tax, which would replace a tax that is expiring. I don't know why they're doing that as a replacement instead of a renewal, but early voting begins today, and the election for those two propositions is May the 2nd. We always talk about the importance of voter registration and getting out to vote very, very often on this program, so I just will remind you of those facts. So, the first week of an 8-week legislative session has come and gone. Not too much has happened yet. I'm going to have a guest a little bit later to talk about a little bit about one of the resolutions that passed this week. H.R. 13 by our own Representative Regina Barrow proclaims April as Sarcoidosis Awareness Month, and we're going to have Rodney Reese from the Sarcoidosis Foundation talking a little bit about that ailment and what it entails and what some of their activities are. I know a lot of folks probably have never heard of this disease. We all know somebody who's had diabetes or cancer or coronary artery disease or something like that. You know, we know about multiple sclerosis and multiple dystrophy and lupus and any variety of other ailments. I actually have known 3 people myself who suffer with the ailment sarcoidosis, and I'm going to let the expert tell us a little bit more about what that entails when he calls in. So we will be hearing from him a little bit later. I went to a luncheon earlier this week sponsored by Leaders with Vision, and we talked about, or the panel discussed, some propositions that are out there to limit the power of the governor in Louisiana. There is a package of bills sponsored by Representative Jerome D. Richard from Lafourche Parish, and the panel included Mr. Richard, who is an independent, the Speaker Pro Tem, Walt Leger out of New Orleans, who is a Democrat, the Senate President Pro Tem, Sharon Weston Broome, who is a Democrat from the Baton Rouge area, longtime public servant. The designated spokesman of the Democratic Party of Louisiana was Representative Ted James, also from Baton Rouge. And the designated spokesman for the Republican Party was Mr. Gervich, the only one of the 5 on the panel who is not an elected representative. And it was a very, very lively and interesting discussion about that package of bills and the power of the governor in Louisiana, whether perceived or real. And some of the things, for instance, one of the bills would take away the governor's ability to line item veto an item in the budget. Now, you may wonder why that affects the power of the governor? Well, if you are an elected representative or senator, there's an important project back in your district, like a road or a bridge or a community center or something like that, and the budget as passed by the legislature contains some funding for that project, the governor can then use the threat of vetoing that item to keep you in line on some of his or her proposals. Now, Governor Jindal is certainly not the only person ever to use that power to keep legislators in line. But so this would operate, this is Governor Jindal's last session with us. This is looking forward to how can the legislature regain its independence. Recall that our government is set up on three co-equal branches of government: the legislative, the executive, and the judicial. So, as I said, in Louisiana, the governor's power is very much greater than governors in other states. That is one of the items in that bill, in that package of bills. Another one would currently, if the legislature if something the legislature has passed is vetoed by the governor, the legislature, the way the Constitution reads, is that a veto session is automatic unless the legislature votes not to have a veto session. Governor Jindal has generously vetoed many bills, including some by Representative Leger. Every year that he's been in office, he's had something vetoed by Governor Jindal. This bill would change the law, as I understand it, to say that to take the opt-out provision away, to say that I believe it says if 2/3 of the legislature passes something and the governor vetoes it, they will come back for a veto session. Now, it doesn't require the legislature to veto anything, but it does require them to come back up and be accountable for the way they voted and have a discussion about whether, no, we're not going to let the governor do this. This is what we intended to do, and we're going to let it stand. You can look for both of those bills to have very, very lively discussions, and I believe Representative Richard has something up in appropriations this week that will be discussed. Other labor bills of note that will be working their way through the process. There is a bill, well, there are actually 3 different bills that would say that public employee union members cannot pay their dues, their union dues, by payroll deduction. Those are big bills for us because we think they are union busting bills. There are a host of entities to which public employees can give their money through payroll deduction. They don't have to write checks. That includes health insurance benefits. It includes savings plans. It includes supplemental insurance, a number of charitable donations like the United Way. And we believe that their ability to pay their dues should be like any of those other things. And we will be working very hard to maintain that. Now, 2 of those bills, one has been withdrawn. A couple of those bills will appear in the House Labor Committee coming up on April the 29th is when we expect them. And there is a bill by Senator Martini that will go to Senate Labor, which may or may not be heard depending upon what happens on the House side. Whatever your feelings about that, we will probably be asking people to talk to their own state representatives and state senators. We will be working very hard on those things because we believe that we have a right to spend our money as we see fit, and that this simply is an attack, a straight-up attack on unions. So that's where we are, and my guest caller is expected any moment, and his name is Rodney Reese with the Sarcoidosis Foundation. Sarcoidosis is a disease that usually becomes evident after some other infection or something. The body has some sort of abnormal response to that, and some tissues grow that aren't supposed to grow, similar to cancer, but it's not cancer. affecting primarily sometimes the skin, sometimes the lungs, sometimes the eyes, but actually can settle in joints and whatever. Very challenging to treat. It can be knocked pretty much into remission for long periods of time by the use of various different therapies. So we're hoping to have a little education on that this morning. This is WTQT 106.1 Baton Rouge Labor Radio. Our call-in number is 343-1075. That's 343-1075. My name is Julie Cherry. I'm the Secretary-Treasurer of the Louisiana AFL-CIO. And this program is brought to you by the Louisiana AFL-CIO and the Baton Rouge Building and Construction Trades. Again, our call-in number is 343-1075. Baton Rouge Labor Radio does have a Facebook page where we post some items of interest happening in other parts of the country. We invite you to visit that Facebook page and please like us. That kind of promotes us in people's feed and helps us get the word out about some other things going on. Here currently you will also see a lot of bills that aim to reduce or eliminate some of our tax exemptions and credits that we give to some corporate entities. I guess the one that a bunch of them have received a lot of press. Some things that also are appearing that haven't received as much press, which you may want to be aware of, are some bills that limit or reduce tax credits or exemptions that individuals receive. For instance, the excess itemized deductions for federal taxes. I get a little bump from that. A lot of middle-class people get a bump from that, especially if they own a home and pay a fair amount of interest every year. That allows me to itemize my deductions, and I would lose that under some of those proposals. There are some to reduce inventory taxes for business. That is going to be pretty much a fight between state and local government because it will produce savings for state governments and increased costs for local governments who pay some of the bills for things that you enjoy, like police and fire protection, with some of those monies. So those are things to keep an eye on. I like to tell people that we're in a huge budget hole. It's been news for months and months and months. As a matter of fact, it's been news since Governor Jindal has been in office because he took the no tax pledge and so forth. And so we have expenses typically go up every year. But he has been very generous in granting some other business incentives, I'll call them that. And I like to tell people you can't cut your way out of a hole. So we've cut higher ed basically to the bone. We've cut health care basically to the bone. We didn't appropriate enough money to run these new public-private partnerships for health care for the poor. That is evident here in Baton Rouge already, where an emergency room has had to close because of uncompensated care they've been required to administer under the law. My prediction would be that there will be a domino effect. There will be other hospitals that will have to follow suit as patients who don't have the ability to pay continue to present themselves at those facilities, and there are facilities that can't turn them away. And we have sent our dollars for that care to these public-private partnerships without finding a way to direct those patients to those designated hospitals instead of what is the next nearest facility. That's what's happened here in Baton Rouge, the amount of care the Baton Rouge General has had to provide that has not been paid for increased over the period of time since we've closed Earl K. Long, and the money's got sent somewhere else. Do we have any more poor people than we had before? Maybe, maybe not. I don't think it's been significant enough to cause that on its own. It's the way we have chosen to spend our money and where we have chosen to spend it that has caused this. It's not any kind of indictment of the Lady of the Lake Foundation, which continues to provide service in our community to anyone who comes to their doors, to people who have private insurance, to people who are Medicaid patients, and even people who don't have any coverage. Like the 250,000 Louisiana residents who are the working poor, basically. They don't qualify for Medicaid now because they make too much money for Medicaid under our rules, but they either work for employers who are still not required to provide health insurance, or they can't afford to buy it out on the exchange, so they're still uninsured. And whereas if we had passed Medicaid expansion in this state, they would be covered by insurance, by Medicaid, which is insurance, because we would lift the poverty level for those who qualify for Medicaid. I know this is controversial with some, but these are folks who get up and go to work every day, and because of what their work situation is and what our job situation is here in Louisiana, their jobs don't afford them the ability to care for themselves and buy typical, normal, regular, market-based health insurance. I personally think that's not only a shame, it's wrong that in this country people can get up and go to work every day, sometimes working 2 and 3 jobs, and still not have access to health care. This illness that we are supposed to be talking about in a few minutes, whenever Rodney calls, has some pretty high costs to take care of it. But remember that when we keep people healthy, we keep them in the workforce, we keep them paying taxes. It produces good results for our states to keep people healthy. And a lot of these foundations, like the American Cancer Society, the Leukemia and Lymphoma Society, the Sarcoidosis Foundation, the American Heart Association, the American Diabetes Association, Greater New Orleans Spina Bifida Organization, and others, in addition to education, provide health care supports through the generosity of givers. I think one of our favorites of almost anybody you talk to is the St. Jude Children's Hospital, which not only provides care to children who have cancer, but really does help take care of families that find themselves in that position. They can't do that without our help. They can't do that without funding, and most of it comes from private donors. Along those lines, I will say that another one of Mr. Richard's bills is to completely do away with NGOs. Those are non-governmental organizations to which we provide tax dollars. I have very, very mixed feelings myself about that particular bill, because some of those agencies do a tremendous amount of work for the few dollars that we send them. These include agencies like the Councils on Aging, which receive some federal funds, some state funds, and some of them also some local funds. One of our neighboring parishes actually has a tax millage dedicated to their Council on Aging. As a result, they provide arguably more services than some agencies that don't have a dedicated tax millage. As I said, I have mixed feelings about that. I understand when we are not fully funding things like pensions, police and fire protection, our education, whether we're talking about K through 12 or higher ed, when we've cut those things continuously and we continue to send money to the extra agencies, we do have to weigh how that happens. There is a limited pool of money. The feeling among many legislators now, whether they are Democrat, Republican, or Independent, is that we will no longer be able to balance our budget just by cutting, because we have cut. Is that to say that there is no pork in our state budget? I'm not a budget expert, but I would say that probably there are many things people would argue that we spend money on that perhaps we could better direct the funds that we have. Still waiting on my caller, who I expected to be talking to by now. That is Rodney Reese with the Sarcoidosis Foundation. Again, Representative Regina Barrow passed this week House Resolution 13, recognizing April as Sarcoidosis Awareness Month, and that is what we are in today. And we are in April, and this is Sarcoidosis Awareness Month. This is Baton Rouge Labor Radio on WTQT 106.1 FM. If you do not live in the Baton Rouge area, you can listen to us online at WTQT.org. This program is streamed live, and you can listen to us that way. My name is Julie Cherry. Our call-in number is 343-1075. If you have an item you'd like to speak about, especially pertaining to what's going on in the legislature right now and what kind of things we can see coming up. Again, I will remind you that early voting for the May 2nd election begins today, and the voting locations here in East Baton Rouge are the governmental building at 222 St. Louis Street, in the Court Plaza building at 10500 Coursey Boulevard, in Baker at the Motor Vehicle Building at 2250 Main Street, and there's a satellite office at the Secretary of State Archives Building at 3851 Essen Lane. In our area, in Iberville, there is a tax on the ballot to renew a 10-year, 1.78 mil property tax that generates $1 million a year for alternative school programs. Proposition 2 in Iberville calls for renewing a 10-year, 4.84 mil property tax that generates $2.8 million a year for school system operations. Proposition 3 that calls for renewing a 10-year, 10.5 mil property tax that generates $6 million a year to supplement teacher salaries and benefits. So that's Iberville Parish. All three propositions support the school system. In Livingston Parish, there are 4 propositions. The Parish Health Unit is seeking a 10-year, 2.5 mil property tax that generates $1.2 million a year. That proposition is a second attempt at local funding after voters last year defeated a 5 mil levy. So they have cut that in half to try to fund a parish health unit. The school board there is seeking to renew a 10-year, 7 mil property tax that generates $3.3 million a year for school maintenance. Livingston Parish is one of our top school districts in the state. That is a renewal, not a new tax. Fire Protection District 10 in Livingston is seeking to continue a 10-year, 11.1 mil property tax that generates $172,000 a year. So it's just that single fire protection district, but it's a renewal as well. And Recreation District 2 is seeking to continue a 10-year, 15 mil property tax that generates $850,000 a year. That's Livingston Parish. In St. James Parish, the school board is seeking authority to incur $56 million in debt to be repaid by extending an existing 10 mil property tax for 20 years to relocate St. James High and possibly build or consolidate other schools. And then in Tangipahoa Parish, Recreation District 39A is seeking authority to renew a 10-year, 15 mil property tax that generates $238,000 a year. Those are the ones that are in our area. Early voting starts today. The regular election is on May the 2nd. Most of these are renewals to support services that citizens are already receiving, and we urge you to exercise your right to vote. And if you are not registered to vote, I urge you to do that at your earliest convenience. We have elections this fall that really will determine the direction this state is going to go in. If we're going to continue on the same path we've been on for 8 years, where we're basically shutting stuff down, we're starving government. That's what we're doing. We're starving government. That's my opinion. It's worth what you paid for it. Or if we're going to change directions and prioritize the services that we wish to receive and how we're going to fund those services. This fall, we will have all of our statewide elected representatives, governor, lieutenant governor, secretary of state, attorney general, treasurer, and so forth will be up for election, as well as our entire state legislature. That is 39 state senators and 105 state representatives. In Louisiana, we do them all at once. So all 144 state legislators will be up for election. If you are not registered to vote, it's pretty easy to do in this state. Besides going to your parish registrar, you can go to any motor vehicle office. If you have a driver's license or a state-issued ID, you can register to vote online because you've already proven your identity. To urge you to be sure that you keep the way you phrase your name exactly the same across documents, and be sure that you update your address if you move. Proud to say that one of my sons recently moved, and he just took care of all of that. There are things that sometimes we overlook that we need to do to keep things current in order to vote. In Louisiana, at every voting precinct, we also have the ability to vote provisionally if, say, you have moved and you haven't updated, or something looks a little bit different. We are supposed to, if somebody ever tells you, well, you're not on the rolls, then you need to ask, can I have a provisional ballot? And I think that I'm pretty sure that's the way that works. The only vote that doesn't count is the vote that doesn't get cast. So you need to make sure you register to vote, and you need to exercise your right to vote. Don't just complain. We all have something to complain about. It's out there if you look for it. But if you're not willing to exercise this most basic, this is the way to have your complaint heard. To register your complaint, you need to go out and vote for something different to happen. Our request line is 343-1075. Please call me if you have something you want to talk about, something going on at the legislature, something happening locally. The first hour of our programming was Charles Showalter with the Union Edge. He spent a great deal of time this morning on the fight to raise the minimum wage in this country. This pressure, and not just from union groups, but from a widespread cross-section of the public, has already led some major corporations to raise the lowest wages that they pay. Now, they haven't raised them to $15 an hour, but Walmart is raising their entry-level wage. Big anti-union company. But they see that they've heard the cry, and they see the need, and they've done so. And McDonald's recently announced that in its corporately owned restaurants, that's not the franchisees, but the ones that are directly owned by McDonald's, they are going to raise the minimum wage that they pay as well. Folks, squeaky wheel gets the grease. We need to talk about this kind of stuff. Join an action in your area. Turn out when you hear about this kind of stuff. That's how things get done. One of the things that I heard on that program this morning that we like our listeners to keep in mind is that whether you're union or non-union, this is, a rising tide lifts all boats. These fights will help all of us. There was a huge story that broke this week about a Seattle CEO who voluntarily instituted a 93% pay cut for himself in order to raise every employee to $70,000 a year. You know, in labor we talk about the income gap and how much CEO pay has risen over the last 40 years compared to average worker pay. That gap has gotten bigger and bigger and bigger, with average CEOs making hundreds of times what the worker bee makes instead of maybe 10 times what the worker bee makes. This person went out there and reduced his salary to $70,000 a year in this area. That is good money. I'm not sure exactly how far it goes in Seattle, but in this area, that's really decent money. You can buy a house on that, raise your family on that, put away some money on that, have health insurance on that, and gave every worker there a guaranteed minimum salary of $70,000. How do you feel? And nobody made this person do that. There's no way you can call this socialism or anything else. This person voluntarily saw that this was the right thing to do. Now, this is an extreme example, folks. How do you feel about that? Let's talk about it. 343-1075. This is Julie Cherry with the Louisiana AFL-CIO. This is you are listening to Baton Rouge Labor Radio on WTQT-LP-FM 106.1. Also available online at WTQT.org. I don't want to do what Michael Day did a few weeks ago and start singing. Already tired of hearing my own voice. Give me a call. Let's talk about this. You will see some other things often in the legislature, some of the quote-unquote minor things. We'll recognize different groups on certain days. We will proclaim a disease awareness day or month. We had a service day, we had a Volunteer Louisiana Day at the Capitol on Tuesday. I'm a part of that commission, and the House and the Senate are collecting donations for military families at this time. There's a contest going on. It's going to support like the Military Assistance Fund, Blue Star Mothers, and so forth. These are ways that the community can engage. It doesn't cost anything to give a little something. You see those food bank barrels in your grocery store. You don't have to make a $50 donation to the food barrel. You can pick up a couple of extra items that are useful and just drop them in the barrel on the way out. These are ways that we can help our own community be a healthy community, be a community where people don't go to bed hungry at night, be a community where someone asked me recently where she could donate some baby food that was unused and still in date. I guess the food bank probably takes that stuff. If you know the answer to that question, call in and let us know. I suggested the Domestic Violence Center, or Battered Women and Children's, because there are people who pass through there in emergency situations or transitional housing and so forth, and they still need to eat. Babies still need to eat. These are ways that our community can help each other stand up. Other ways that you can help your community is to get involved in groups like Together Baton Rouge. That has done tremendous good in our community already. One of the first things they did was get a bridge repaired in a neighborhood where there was only one way to get in and out, and they were having tremendous commutes and terrible traffic problems, and they couldn't get the attention outside their own community until Together Baton Rouge was formed, largely at the behest of some of the African American ministers in our community who said, this just isn't right. It is the squeaky wheel that gets the grease. You have to stand up, and it helps if you stand up in a group. And in a way, that's what organized labor is all about. We can amplify our voice when it's not just single voices. It is a way to collectively express what our needs are, what our wants are. It is a way to get safe workplaces. It is a way to get workplaces that have reasonable rules for how things should operate. It is a way to have workers have a way to go somewhere and have a complaint addressed. It really is a cooperative agreement between labor and management. It doesn't have to be adversarial at all. It doesn't have to be argumentative, combative, fight. It's a way for people to sit down at a table and have common agreements about how things ought to happen. That's what we do, and we do that for our members, and we are very grateful to have the opportunity to do that for our members. So some other things that are happening in the legislature. I've talked about a couple of the big items. One day I'm hoping to have on this program someone that I work with in the area of workers' compensation. I'm not a lawyer. I was a classroom teacher, but through my position at the AFL-CIO, I serve on the Workers' Compensation Advisory Council. That is the group that advises the legislature in matters of law that have to do with workers' compensation. Now, the interesting thing about workers' compensation is most of us never, ever, ever need to know anything about it. We're never injured at work, and if we are injured at work, it doesn't result in any lost time from work. By and large, Louisiana is a very safe state to work in, and we're very grateful for that fact. However, when we do have injuries, sometimes they are catastrophic injuries. So, workers' compensation is the area of law that protects people who are injured at work. And believe it or not, it is also set up to protect employers from lawsuits alleging fault, that, this happened because the employer didn't provide this safety equipment, or, knew that this hazard existed and didn't address it, didn't inform workers, whatever. That's what workers' compensation does. If you have an injury at work, I want to bring someone in and tell you how you make sure you report that. And folks, it doesn't have to be a very, very serious injury or an apparently serious injury to need reporting. Sometimes a slip and fall, you feel okay at first, and then later your neck starts to hurt or whatever. You need to report injuries when they happen. Even if you don't think there's going to be a claim, there needs to be something that says, I told my employer that this happened. So in workers' compensation this year, we will see a bill. There's a couple of things. One of them is to reverse some changes we made a couple of years ago that are making it a little bit more difficult to navigate the system. And there's also a bill to affect the way doctors are able to prescribe medicines to injured workers. That bill is going to be an important bill. In labor, we've always held the position that, one, you should have the right to choose your own doctor when you are injured. We still have that ability in Louisiana. A lot of states have lost that. You go where the company tells you to go. And two, that your doctor should be able to practice medicine the way he or she feels fit to practice medicine. Well, a few years ago, we enacted a major change to the law requiring doctors to provide a certain standard of care for the most common injuries that happen at work and that are on what we call a medical treatment, in what we call our medical treatment guidelines. This has been a trend that has been coming in many states for years. And so now for approved treatment, if you want to do something outside of those guidelines, you have to basically petition and provide some evidence that that is the way that the injury or illness should be treated. And that is where I should remind you that everything that's work-related isn't necessarily an injury. There are some workplace-related illnesses as well. If you've worked around hazardous substances, typically things like mesothelioma and asbestosis are workplace-related illnesses. Happen around people who do a lot of insulation work, asbestos workers, sometimes people who've worked in plants or who have worked in shipyards, and these diseases take a long time to manifest themselves. So you may have worked someplace 20 years ago and then turn up with these symptoms of one of these diseases that needs treating. So workers' compensation was an agreement, basically is a trade-off agreement between employers and employees, saying, okay, where the employers are saying, okay, we're going to guarantee medical benefits and a certain amount of income replacement if you're unable to work, in exchange for you not suing us in court and determining that we are liable or at fault. So most of these situations are resolved. Many are resolved without going to court because the law says this, and this is going to happen, and it's an uncontested claim, and the employer or the insurer pays the claim, and the employee, the injured worker, is taken care of, hopefully goes back to work. That is the best case scenario, that you receive appropriate medical treatment, you're able to go back to your pre-injury job, and everything is fine. If the injured worker is not able to go back to work, there are partial and total disability rules or laws that govern partial and total disability and what happens, and they do provide some income replacement for workers who aren't able to go back to work. Sometimes someone is able to go back to work but not at their pre-injury job. So the law is also to allow for some retraining and for employers, some incentives for employers to put someone to work who has been injured on the job, because those folks, may pose a little bit higher risk for an employer and a little bit higher cost to insure them. In Louisiana, we have something called the Second Injury Fund that is to help employers employ workers who are disabled or workers who have been previously injured. Our fund has done some tremendous work in the last few years, providing some very low-cost adaptations for disabled workers to be able to work and earn their own way and be in commerce. And this is paid for by employers. They pay an assessment to pay for this fund to be able to help people go back to work. So I want to say we have a lot of very responsible employers in this state who care very deeply about their employees. They know that they don't make any money if their employees don't have the training they need, don't have the equipment they need, don't have good work sites and good work rules, and our union employers in particular are extremely responsible and understand the value of the human capital, the people who work for them, that they are the ones who produce any wealth that any of us enjoy. I will be going to a conference in the beginning of May, sponsored by a group that works for injured workers. It's called the Workers' Injury Law and Advocacy Group, and it's basically lawyers from all over the country who stand up for injured workers. Some states, like I said, most of the time, most of us don't need to know anything about workers' compensation, and most workers' compensation claims go through without being contested, so many workers do not need a lawyer. But if there is a contested claim, if the employer or their insurer says that a claim should not be paid for, then that will go to court. But it goes to a workers' compensation court, which is an administrative court, and lawyers from both sides present their cases in front of a judge, and that's how the case is decided about what should be paid for, or if a claim is what we call compensable under the law. In other words, did it happen at work, and is it the reason that this person can't work anymore or couldn't work for a particular period of time. These are important worker protections that didn't exist before the 1900s. Workers' compensation insurance came into being in the first couple of decades of the 1900s, following some terrible, terrible accidents like the Triangle Shirtwaist Fire, in which workers were locked inside a factory, and there was a fire, and at the time there were even children on the work site, and many people died in that, and there was no protection for these employees or for their families. Obviously, if you're locked into a building and it's on fire and you can't get out, that is an issue where the employer is liable for that. This would be an incredible way, terribly incredible way to perish in a fire, largely because of the efforts of labor, organized labor. We have protections against such things these days, and safety rules and safety equipment, and some protection if you are injured at work and you can't go back to work. They don't last forever. There are other social safety nets that will come into play if somebody is permanently disabled. But largely through the efforts of organized labor, we have safety rules, and we have protections for injured workers, and we also have rules about child labor in this country. How old you have to be to work, where you can work, what hours you can work, how many hours you can work. There are certain jobs that are considered unsafe for adolescents to work, and they can't hire anybody below a certain age. Many countries don't have this, folks. Particularly, I'm thinking of developing countries like China. In this country, we love to buy inexpensive goods, and our country has been inundated with goods produced in a lot of other countries that don't have human rights protections, that still let young children labor long hours and don't provide education for them. And we don't think about that when we pick up those goods. We don't think about who actually produced it and why it's so much cheaper than what we can produce here. But I would urge you, labor kind of is a public conscience in some ways as well. I know there's a lot of controversy over immigrants and who want to work here and their legal status and how they come into the country and so forth. I would like for people to be able to come legally. That isn't always possible for them, but I would urge people to remember that the folks who come in to work really just want the same thing for their families that you want for your family. They want a better life. They want to be able to provide for them, and we should find a path for them. If they're truly working jobs that Americans don't want to work, we should find a path for them to do so that isn't quite so difficult to navigate. It will also be part of the rising tide that lifts all boats, because employers will no longer be able to pay them substandard wages under the table, ignore them if they're hurt. I mean, a lot of quote-unquote illegals, I'm going to call them undocumented, because there's no such thing as an illegal person. We have undocumented aliens. Persons can't be illegal. Anyway, they will take an undocumented alien who has been injured at work and drop them off in an emergency room and then deny that they ever worked for them. You think this doesn't happen, but it does. And they're paying that person below minimum wage and not paying into unemployment, not paying into Social Security, not paying for workers' compensation insurance. So they're undercutting responsible employers, people who are playing by the rules, keeping wages down for American workers by doing that, defying the law as it regards to unemployment, Social Security, federal income tax, and so forth. You should be able to see that if we can get employers to pay by the rule, we will all benefit, because those mandatory payroll taxes that your employer and my employer are paying that are going to cover, into a pool that provides coverage for many. Those will be healthier funds, and we won't be talking about Social Security going away or employers' inability to provide workers' compensation or health insurance because it's too expensive. If everybody pays in, folks, the risk pool is lower and more people are covered and the funds stay healthy. Other things we need to do is watch our government a little bit more closely and get them to stop raiding funds and paying for things that those funds were not intended to pay for. This has been one of the biggest sins, if you will, of the Jindal administration, raiding all of our funds where we put money away for a rainy day to pay recurring expenses with one-time funds, and now we no longer have the cushion, and we still have the need for the service, and we don't have any way to pay for it. This is what that has gotten for us. We have allowed or sat idly by while our funds have been raided, money that we put away for a rainy day. Good example, one of the things this year is going to seek to sell the rest of the tobacco settlement funds. That would be one-time money instead of money that's out there in a fund generating more funds to pay some of our existing needs, but then that money will be gone. We will not have it anymore. It was intended to be something that would be able to last for a very, very long time. These are the kinds of things that we do need to watch. You will see efforts to impose some cigarette taxes, which you may remember a couple of years ago we had a 4-cent renewal that the governor opposed as a raised tax. If you're already paying it, it's not a raised tax. Okay? If it's already on the books as a tax, but you're exempt from it under some industrial exemption, and we decide to do away with the exemption, it's still not a raised tax. It's a tax that's already in statute. These are my opinions. They're how I feel about that. It isn't raising a tax if the tax is already enacted into law. So you will see some bills that seek to reduce some of those industrial tax exemptions. But I spoke earlier on the front part of the hour about there are an astonishing number of bills also that will seek to balance that budget on the backs of working people, like getting rid of some of our excess federal itemized deductions, changing our tax rates back to Stelly rates, which I personally am not against, because when we reversed that a few years ago, I didn't see a big bump in my paycheck. I was already paying it. I didn't notice any windfall from it. I think I heard somebody quote this week that the average taxpayer maybe got about $80 more added to their paycheck over a year, and the rich folks got about $800 added to their paychecks over a year's time. So these were things that stabilized our income, and most of us, because it's taken off of your check, you don't ever see it. You don't notice it didn't look like a big raise when we stopped paying it. And it's a very progressive tax. By that I mean it's stable when income is going up, and because we are going to have a building boom here eventually, incomes will continue to rise, then our revenue stream will rise to meet it, and we will be able to provide services for the increased number of people who will be here in our state to work those jobs, all that building that is supposed to take place along the I-10 corridor. It's still going to come. Folks, make no mistake, the price of gas and oil is not going to stay down. It is going to go up. This is a fighting match. This is a match that's happening halfway around the world about what those rates are going to be and who's going to be able to sell oil to whom. Those rates are artificially low right now. They will go back up, and some of those building projects will come online, and we will need the trained workforce to go to work at those very living wage quality jobs. This is Baton Rouge Labor Radio on WTQT 106.1. This is Julie Cherry with the Louisiana AFL-CIO. Baton Rouge Labor Radio is brought to you by the Louisiana AFL-CIO and the Baton Rouge Building and Construction Trades. We work not only for our members' better work situations, but we believe for everyone. When union wages go up, generally other wages go up to meet the demand, because if you're a non-union employer, you still need quality employees to work for you, and if the union is paying more, you're going to have more folks looking to work union jobs. We work for everybody. We think that we've done a lot of good. People say, what have you done for me lately? If you enjoy a weekend, if you enjoy a 40-hour work week, if you have health insurance benefits or pension benefits on your job, you need to thank a union. We are the folks who brought you the weekend, and you may not ever have been a union employee, but many of those things you enjoy would not have happened had the unions not come about. Well, my guest did not make it, and so I've been talking for almost an hour. I'll remind you one more time that early voting starts today. We talked about tax propositions. Almost all of them are renewals. I told you about the ones happening in our area, including a couple of St. George Fire Protection District taxes in East Baton Rouge. In Ascension, there is Drainage District is looking to renew a tax. In Iberville, they are primarily school districts, but there is a ballot to elect 3 at-large members to the St. Gabriel City Council. That early voting starts today. Then there are the school taxes. In Livingston, there is a tax for a parish health unit, tax proposed for the school board, for Fire Protection District 10 and Recreation District 2. And in St. James Parish, the school district is seeking authority to incur some debt and extend a property tax to relocate St. James High School and possibly build or consolidate some other schools. And in Tangipahoa, they are looking to, the Recreation District 39A is seeking to renew a 10-year, 15 mil property tax that raises about $238,000 a year. If you live in one of those places, you can vote early for the next week at one of the designated places. In East Baton Rouge parishes, those are the Clerk of Court's office, in the governmental building downtown, the Clerk of Court's satellite office in the Court Plaza building on Coursey Boulevard, the Motor Vehicle building in Baker on Main Street, and the Secretary of State's building on Essen Lane. And hours for early voting are 8:30 a.m. to 6 o'clock every day. And the election itself will occur on May the 2nd for those taxes. I urge you to go out and vote if one of those if you live in any of those districts. If you are not registered to vote, I urge you to go out and register to vote at your earliest convenience. You can do that online if you have a valid Louisiana driver's license. There's an easy site called govote.com. That's GEAUX vote.com. That will take you to the Secretary of State's website, and there will be some links there for voters. Like I said, if you have a valid Louisiana driver's license, you can register online and get your voter registration card in the mail. And remind you again that all of our state representatives, state senators, and statewide elected officials will be up for election October 24th. Qualifying is, I believe it's in late August, and you have to register within a month before, more than a month or more out from an election to vote in that election. So I urge you to take advantage of that and exercise your right to vote and make sure that your vote is counted and your voice is heard. If you love the way something's going, you want to vote for the same kind of people, well, I can't say much to you. But if you want to change the direction, get out there and vote, and we appreciate it. It's Baton Rouge Labor Radio. This has been Julie Cherry, and I'm going to return you to the regularly scheduled programming on WTQT. Thank you so much.